was in 2016. And I will tell you this, the time that I first met with Ted Cruz to discuss this issue before I even joined his campaign, I sat down and Ted and I had this discussion about how important the evangelical or the Christian vote was. And I had a very strong belief, which I didn't share with Ted first. I wanted to hear what he thought before I told him my opinion. I already knew what I thought, and we ended up having the exact same belief, and that was the evangelical Christian vote is the single most important voting bloc in any given election, and it was in particular in 2016. Barack Obama had done a really good job. This is kind of my quick assessment of how he won 2 times. He did a really good job of creating coalitions of voters around the country, and he did it by dividing by race, white from black, white against Hispanic, rich against poor, male against female, worker against employee. So he created all these divisions of coalitions, and then he went after each little coalition with a reason they should vote for him. And my assessment is the single most important coalition that I believe probably most of your listeners belong to is their identity in Christ, not their identity as male or female, rich or poor, white, Hispanic, black, Caucasian, whatever. It's your identity in Christ. So we've already got this huge voting block out there, and we're already organized. In fact, most Christians meet every week in a church or twice a week sometimes in a church, so the coalition already existed. And I told Ted the most important thing we could do is get that coalition motivated and mobilized to go vote. And I said there was no Republican candidate who could win in 2016 the presidency without the evangelical vote, and there was no Republican that could lose if they had the evangelical vote. Didn't matter if it was Ted Cruz or Mike Huckabee or Donald Trump or any of the other 16 candidates in total that were running on the Republican side. It was essential to that election, and I think it is essential in this election as well that they be motivated and mobilized to go vote Tuesday.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Buddy Pilgrim. Let me just mention, if you would like to join the conversation, perhaps you have a thought about the voter turnout in your particular area. Maybe you've already early voted and seen some of the lines. Maybe you have some thoughts about some of these commercials on television. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Also, we are broadcasting, as we always do, not only on pointofview.net, but also on Facebook Live. And if you want to leave a comment there, we'll read it a little bit later. Continue our conversation with Buddy Pilgrim right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You have probably heard comments about certain people living in a bubble. They live in affluent communities cut off from some of the realities that most Americans face. Due to the research by Charles Murray, we can now identify where these bubble communities are located. In his book, Coming Apart, he argued that a high IQ, highly educated upper class was formed over the last half century that is disconnected from the culture of mainstream America. Charles Murray put a quiz in his book that PBS decided to post online. More than 47,000 people posted their scores along with zip codes where they lived when they were 10 years old. Charles Murray did an analysis of the quiz data along with other data, and even though this is not a true representative sample of America, it does provide some interesting conclusions. Overall, it reinforces our general assumption that many of the leaders in politics, business, and the media grew up and often still live in bubble communities. For example, many of the bubbliest zip codes in America are located in New York or California. In New York City, they're found in the Upper West Side and Upper and Lower East Sides in Manhattan. They're also found in Brooklyn and the suburbs of New York. California has lots of bubble zip codes in the San Francisco region, as well as in the Silicon Valley and the Los Angeles region. We can also find lots of bubble zip codes in the Washington, D.C. area, especially in the suburban communities that house many of the politicians, bureaucrats, and other government officials that make policy decisions that affect our everyday lives. So I hope you share my concern that many of the people who have had such a significant influence in our daily lives live in a world with a very thick cultural bubble that separates them from the lives of ordinary Americans. This is not a positive demographic trend. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us Buddy Pilgrim, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, or feel free just to sit back and listen, maybe take some notes along the way. And we're going to get into all sorts of different issues related to the campaign. Let me mention next hour we're going to be talking with Charles Sauer. You perhaps are familiar with him in the past because he has written about a number of issues. We're going to talk about the profit motive, which really helps us understand a little bit more about what are some of the inner workings, not only just in the economy, because he uses profit in the broadest sense of the word, but also a number of other issues. And then even in the third hour, we'll be talking about what is happening with our good friends at Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So lots taking place here, but if we could, Buddy, for just a few more minutes, since we're talking about the importance of the Christian vote, let me talk about the other aspect of that. And that is there are just still a lot of Christians that say, you know, politics is dirty. It involves compromise. If I see one more negative ad on television, I am simply going to scream, and I'm certainly not going to go and vote for any of these candidates. I think there's a stewardship responsibility that many of us do not understand in terms of we should not bury our talent, or in this case, ignore the importance of voting, right?
Absolutely, you're right. I don't like a lot of the negative ads that are on television either, but the negative ads, regardless of whether they're run by a Republican or a Democrat, is no excuse for us to shirk our responsibilities to vote. And here's the thing I tell people so often on this. Someone's values or value system is going to be reflected in public policy. Someone's is. So if you don't get out and cast your vote for a candidate who, as closely as possible, reflects your core values, then someone else's values who are antithetical to yours will get elected, and their values will be reflected in public policy. And that's why it really matters. So we can't let a negative ad campaign, even by someone that we like, cause us to sit on the sideline. And we also can't look at the individual and just say, well, gee, I don't like everything that person does. Look, I don't like everything President Trump does. I don't like the way he tweets all the time, some of the things he says. But I tell you this, when I look at policies that he implements, policies are what affect my life. His tweets don't affect my life. His policies do, and his policies on the subject of life, the sanctity of life, Israel, religious liberty, conservative originalist judges, jobs in the economy, his policies on all those issues align with my core beliefs. So I need to support him and support candidates who are similar in their thinking.
I know, of course, you do the Liberty Line program, and one of the things you've looked at is judges. This is why we've spent a fair amount of time looking at these Senate races. Of course, Kelly Shackelford joins us every Friday, and we see that many people are now starting to suggest that probably when you look at some of those seats that have been held by Republicans, that they will be again held, in some cases by a different individual. You can think of, for example, what happens in Utah, where Mitt Romney is going to obviously win. You would hope that Ted Cruz would win. And again, in Missouri, whereas before it was held by a different in Tennessee, when it was held by a different individual, it looks like Marsha Blackburn will win. Yes. So those are all retention. But then when you look at North Dakota, that looks like a pickup. It looks like Kramer is way far ahead of Heitkamp, so that's a pickup. But then you get into some of these others, and I just mentioned Missouri. I could mention Arizona, Indiana, Florida, and a couple of others, where it's just almost too close to call. But if indeed Republicans retain control of the Senate, that's good news for the whole issue of judicial appointments, isn't it?
It's extremely good news, and it's exceedingly important. So often we think about judges just relative to the Supreme Court, but the thing I like to remind everybody of is less than 5% of all the cases that go to court ever end up in the Supreme Court. The vast majority of lawsuits that are filed or legal cases that end up in court all around the United States end up in a circuit court like the Northern District of Texas or the Eastern District of Texas. And even if somebody wins or loses their court case in that particular federal court, if they appeal it, it goes to one of the circuit courts for Court of Appeals. Like if you appeal a case here in Texas, it goes to the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. And the vast majority of cases don't even ever get appealed, but the ones that do go to an appellate court, and they get settled there, and only a tiny fraction of the ones from the appellate courts end up going to the Supreme Court. So most of the law that becomes precedent to impact other law and other judicial rulings for the rest of our lives takes place in these circuit courts around the country. And President Obama left over 170 vacancies in those circuit courts around the country because he believed Hillary Clinton was going to win and she was going to get to fill them. Donald Trump needs to keep filling those. He's already filled more than any other president other than George Washington as a percentage, and he needs to keep filling them, and he cannot do it without a 50-plus majority in the Senate.
Let's talk about the quality of those judges. And to emphasize that, let's go back to a little over 2 years ago where, at the time, Kerby Anderson and Buddy Pilgrim were talking about the fact that if you had Ted Cruz as the president, we'd be very confident about the federal judges that he would put on the federal courts, whether it's district court, circuit court, or Supreme Court. And we weren't so sure about this guy by the name of Donald Trump.
Right.
But now we have 2 years later. What's your thoughts?
Well, I've been very pleased with the selections that President Trump has made, and this was a turning point really in his election, I think, in getting the evangelical support behind him. When he came out with that initial list when he was running against Hillary and said, I promise that I will pick Supreme Court nominees from this list, and it was a list of conservative, originalist judges that he would appoint. He's picked two really good ones. I think Neil Gorsuch is absolutely stellar. I think Kavanaugh is a very good, very conservative originalist judge as well. And there are others that are on that list. And that list was influenced by Senator Ted Cruz as well as the Federalist Society and Jim DeMint as well. Those are good people who gave input, and I think we're going to be able to count on President Trump selecting additional conservative, originalist nominees to the Supreme Court and to the circuit courts around the country through the rest of his presidency.
And again, I wouldn't have predicted that, but again, as you point out, certainly has put more people on the court, in part because there has been a lag time. There's still so many vacancies on the court. But if you had told me 2 years ago when you and I were talking that not only would he put on these originalist judges that we would like, but that he would actually break the record for the most number of individuals on the appeals court, breaking the record that has been held for some time by John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in terms of getting that many through, I would be really surprised. So the situation that exists now for many of our religious liberty people, like a Kelly Shackelford, like a Jay Sekulow, and a variety of others, is much better than it was before. And if this trend continues, we are going to see a remarkable change in terms of all sorts of issues on religious liberty, as well as all sorts of other church-state issues. But when we come back from the break, we'll probably also talk about this issue of abortion and a variety of other topics that will be affected. And I didn't see it coming, but I have to say I'm pretty pleased with, indeed, the individuals that are serving at each one of those levels. And again, if the Senate races continue in the direction they are, it is not only possible that Republicans will retain control of the Senate, but actually might pick up a seat here or there.
And I tell you what, this situation with judges, I've got to give some credit to Mitch McConnell. And I'm not usually a great fan of Mitch McConnell because I'd like to have somebody more conservative than him in that seat. But I tell you what, when it comes to pushing these judges through the Senate approval process, He has been the man that made that happen.
Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to spend a little bit of time. Since we've already talked about religious liberty, we'll spend a little bit of time on that as well. But I know one of the things that Buddy Pilgrim has been dealing with is the whole issue of socialism versus capitalism. By the way, we have not only various booklets, as we talked about yesterday, on immigration, but also one that I've put together on socialism versus capitalism. And that's another one of those things, Buddy, just before we go to a break, that I would never have predicted. Sure, I expect Bernie Sanders to hold to those views, and, of course, this Alexia Ocasio-Cortez as well. But I have been struck by the number of individuals in leadership in the Democratic Party, almost all of them who are going to be running against Donald Trump, or at least running in their primaries so that they could run against Donald Trump, that are taking more radical positions than other Democratic leaders just a few years ago were taking. So I want to come back. I want to talk about that because we hear so often that, well, both parties have become more radical. And my answer to that is, look at the Republican Party platform in 2000, compare it to the Republican platform in 2016, virtually identical. Then look at the Democratic Party platform in 2000 compared to the one in 2016, or even more so, the one that will come out in 2020, and you have some remarkable differences. So we're going to take a break and continue our conversation with Buddy Pilgrim. If you'd say, I'd sure like to know a little bit more about him and some of the material that's available, or I'd like to know how to vote and how I can learn about these particular candidates, don't forget, we have our midterm election resources on our website, pointofview.net. Go to that, put in your zip code, and you'll have a lot of information that'll help you cast an intelligent vote. We'll be right back.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Buddy Pilgrim. And again, he is the president of Integrity Leadership Institute, which he founded, now called Integrity Management Services. And if you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to go to our website and find out a little bit more about the teaching of biblical principles for business and politics. And also, of course, he's been involved with the Liberty Line programs, and we're working our way through some of the reasons why you need to vote. And if you've already voted, you can sit back and kind of listen. But if you are not yet convinced that you should vote, I think by now you should be, in light of all the things we've talked about. We'll certainly encourage you to continue listening as let's, if we can, Buddy, talk about this issue of religious liberty, because we've already sort of illustrated that. But I think a lot of people tend to think that once you get a decision, then everything is fine. And I think you can use a couple of great illustrations. We had a Mojave Cross case that was sort of decided by the Supreme Court, but right now Kelly Shackelford every day is reminding us that they've got a case called the Bladensburg Cross in Maryland that's going to go before the Supreme Court. You would have thought, well, we solved the question about whether or not crosses can be on public land. Oh, no, we haven't. And they might also say, well, you have Jack Phillips, so here's a guy that actually won 7-2 by the Supreme Court. Well, we still have Aaron and Melissa Klein, and for that matter, Jack Phillips has another case that was brought against him by the Human Rights Commission. So I think it's the point and principle of eternal vigilance. But I do believe that this particular court, constructed the way it is now, is going to stand for religious liberty. And I never was really too sure about the previous court. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I wasn't certain at all about the previous court. I believe this one will. And religious liberty touches so many different areas, because it can be, if you're in the bakery business or the shirt printing business, whether or not someone can try to force you to participate in a same-sex marriage, which you don't want to participate in. Now, that's a whole different issue than just whether or not you'll sell someone a cake or a cupcake or a T-shirt if they walk into your store. You should not be forced to be a participant in a service that is antithetical to your beliefs. That's one aspect of religious liberty. Another aspect of it is freedom of speech for churches and for ministers and for people who are in ministry. And President Trump has been very active from the beginning of his presidency to sign an executive order to tell the Internal Revenue Service not to, or to suspend their enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, which was designed to threaten, intimidate, and muzzle anyone in ministry. And frankly, that could come down to even a nonprofit organization like your own program, to not have the freedom to speak. And we need a Congress, we need a House of Representatives and a Senate who will pass laws that will support religious liberty and religious freedom in this country in every different aspect of it. And if I can take just a moment, Kirby, I want to give you an example of a phone call that I got at my ministry after a lady had watched some Faith for Our Nation broadcast that I've been doing with Kenneth Copeland Ministries. She called. She said, I live in New Jersey. She said, my senator is Bob Menendez, a very liberal Democrat. The person running against him is Bob Hugin. He's a Republican. He's generally conservative, but he said that he believes in supporting Planned Parenthood. So her question was, if this Republican is going to support Planned Parenthood and Bob Menendez is a liberal Democrat that supports Planned Parenthood, should I just go ahead and vote for the Democrat anyway, since there's no difference between the two of them?
Well,
and I said, no, you shouldn't. And here's the reason why. Even if there were no differences on other issues, she said, aren't I going to be accountable for a vote that guy takes for Planned Parenthood? And I said, here's the first and most important vote that senator is going to take. It's going to be who's going to be the Senate Majority Leader. And the Senate Majority Leader is going to be the person who determines every piece of legislation that goes to the Senate to be voted on. They're going to determine who heads all the committees, who's on all the committees. They're going to determine whether or not judges get passed. They're going to determine the total direction for the country. So you at least know that Republican is going to vote for a Republican Speaker, a Republican Senate Majority Leader, and in the House, a Republican Congressman is going to vote for a Republican House Majority, not House Majority Leader, Speaker of the House, Speaker of the House, okay? And those two positions are going to determine the course of the nation. So you have to look at something broader than just the individual and any specific vote they may take on another issue.
Well said. And I've said this before, that we'll get people calling in, and having done this show for more than 30 years, I have people saying, oh, I just look at the man. I say, well, I think you look at the individual, you look at his or her character, you look at how they stand on the issues, you look at who they might have on their staff. That's really important with presidents and governors and others, but even for the Senate and Congress, because many cases are influenced by that. But you also have to pay attention to the party. There's some people right now that are saying, well, I kind of like Beto O'Rourke, and I think he'd be able to bring us together. And I'm going, you have no idea the amount of pressure Chuck Schumer will put on him the moment he walks in that door. Or Colin Allred, he seems like a nice guy. I really like some of the things he's talking about. Yes, but he's going to have to toe the line that Nancy Pelosi sets forth, and it's going to feel for these people like boot camp, because even though the Republicans sometimes have trouble herding cats, I will give credit to the Democrats. They keep their people in line with very significant threats.
Absolutely.
And that's something to pay attention to as well, don't you think?
So absolutely. But you said it so well. A vote for Beto O'Rourke is a vote for Chuck Schumer to lead the Senate, and a vote for Colin Allred is a vote for Nancy Pelosi to lead the House of Representatives. And let me say something else. I was listening to MSNBC the other day, which I listen to occasionally just to hear how they're framing issues. They've taken the concept of checks and balances, which our founding fathers talked about as being very important, and they try to present checks and balances as being about Republicans versus Democrats. So Democrats get to be a check and balance against Republicans. That's not the checks and balances that our founders were talking about. They were talking about the checks and balances of having three different branches of government: an executive, which executes the law, a legislative branch, which passes the law, and a judicial branch, which interprets the law, and that each of those have defined roles, and they are a check and balance against each other. The founders were not talking about you have to have a Democrat to check a Republican. It's a completely different concept. It's a misuse of the concept.
I would agree. Well, since we've talked about some of those issues, let's put one on the table that, again, people might say, well, the issue of abortion, we can't seem to pass a constitutional amendment. We can't get the Supreme Court to rule on abortion. But I think you've already illustrated a very important issue. Will we fund Planned Parenthood, first of all? Will there be other kinds of legislation? Because in the past we've had, for example, waiting periods, 24-hour waiting periods, parental consent, the fetal pain issue, and on and on. Will we have those kinds of actions initially passed by Congress? And so those are issues to pay attention to. And sooner or later, and it could be sooner given the health of some of those individuals on the court that aren't pro-life, sooner or later, some of these senators may have a chance to vote in another Supreme Court nominee who would be even more pro-life. So I think this issue of abortion is more important than sometimes Christians realize that it is.
It is, and I want to tell you, there is. I don't ever like to make all of the political discussion about abortion, because I want people to understand a breadth of issues, but there is literally no more important issue than the life of a child prior to its birth. And that is supreme, and we cannot stand before a righteous and holy God and say, I voted for a pro-abortion candidate because I like their economic policies better, because that's putting money above the life of a child. And there are other pieces of legislation that will come forward. The pain-capable bill has been passed by the House of Representatives, and it's sitting in the well of the Senate. And what I would really like to do is see the filibuster done away with, either that or get 60 Republicans in there. President Trump has said he will sign the pain-capable bill if the Senate will pass it, now that the House has done their job. And if you're not familiar with it, if you're a listener out there, the pain-capable bill just does this one simple thing. If a child in the womb is 20 weeks of age, gestational age, or greater, it says you cannot kill that child. And if you look at a sonogram of a 20-week-old baby in the womb, you can see its head, its nose, its eyes, its feet, its toes, its little bitty fingers. You can listen to its heartbeat, and it feels pain literally as much as we do. That's why it's called the pain-capable bill. And the only way you can abort a child that is 20 weeks of gestational age or more is to literally crush the skull of that baby to get it out of the womb. You cannot tell me that is anything that anyone should be condoning. But the Democrats don't want to have any limits on abortion all the way up to the day of birth.
Well, again, we're going to take a break. We'll come back and briefly talk about this issue of socialism and capitalism, but also one of the other issues is Israel and foreign policy, and I'd love to get some thoughts from Buddy Pilgrim also about the interactions he's had over this last 2 years with President Donald Trump. So we have a lot more to cover, and we will do so. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to get some election resources, that's on our website, pointofview.net. And if you know your zip code, you will be able to print out lots of great material that will help you make an intelligent choice about who to vote for. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show, but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that a school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes talking with Buddy Pilgrim. And perhaps you've seen some of these YouTube videos where people go out into the street and say, what's wrong with socialism? And they look at you and say, well, nothing's wrong with socialism. Well, would you like this to be a socialist country? Well, of course. You know, that's just a great idea. And I'm going to vote for a socialist candidate. And Buddy Pilgrim, I don't think I ever would have expected that. I mean, I know, having grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I was born in Berkeley. So, okay, I was around socialists then. Every year, my wife and I go to Vermont before I speak in New York, and there's a lot of socialists there, including Bernie Sanders. But I never thought that I would see people in the major parties, and primarily in the Democratic Party, promote socialism. What's wrong with that issue?
Well, it truly is astounding how many mainstream Democrats are supporting the concept of socialism. The Democrat Party today is not the Democrat Party that my dad voted for in the 1960s. They really do believe in this concept of socialism. And some people don't even understand the difference between the two. I think the vast majority of people don't understand truly the differences. Capitalism is simply defined as an economic system in which the capital resources, that means the means of production and distribution and exchange of goods and services. So it's an economic system in which the capital resources are privately owned and privately operated. Socialism is exactly the opposite of that. It's where the resources that control the production, distribution, and exchange of goods and services is either owned by or totally heavily controlled by the government. And here's the real point I want to make about that. A lot of people say they hate big business because they control so much of your life. You got all these business leaders and major corporations that control billions of dollars. It's concentrated in the hands of these people. There are millions of businesses in the United States. So you do have billions of dollars controlled by millions of companies around the country. Imagine if all of that wealth and power were concentrated not in the hands of a few million businesses, but in the hands of a few hundred politicians. You talk about the control of wealth and power in our lives. That alone is enough reason to say socialism doesn't make sense. There's nothing free market about socialism when the government's controlling virtually everything.
And again, we've kind of seen a remarkable shift in right now some of the leaders in the Democratic Party, whether it's Joe Biden or Cory Booker or Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. I mean, with the exception maybe Joe Biden, almost all the rest of them believe in a single-payer health care plan called Medicare for All. Almost all of them believe in free college tuition. How are you going to pay for that? Almost all of them believe in guaranteed basic income. Oh, my goodness. Abolishing ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a living wage of $15 an hour. This isn't even the Democratic Party of 15 years ago in some ways.
No, it's not. You know, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who's a dear friend of mine, I believe she's the person who coined the phrase that Obamacare is the crown jewel of socialism. And now they've kind of gotten this phrase, Medicare for all. And I think that's ultimately going to turn against the Democrats. And here's why. It sounded good at first because there are a lot of old elderly people who like Medicare. So they said, well, we just want to do Medicare for all. But then they go, oh, my gosh, think about that. If you literally tried to do Medicare for all, you would crater the system. The cost estimates, and they're very accurate, are over $32.5 billion to do Medicare for everyone. You cannot do that. It will destroy the system for the people who are elderly, who are on Medicare now, who paid into it their entire life. It won't work.
Yeah, $32 trillion. So, again, just a incredible number that just makes your hair hurt. I mean, it's just unbelievable how anybody could even hold to that. But let me move on, because one of the other issues I know that our listeners are concerned about is the nation of Israel and foreign policy. And again, 2 years ago, you were to tell me that Donald Trump, even if he does have a son-in-law that's Jewish, that he would be one of the greatest promoters of Israel, that he wouldn't just talk about moving the capital and our embassy to the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I would have said, I don't think so. And that's exactly what this president has done.
Well, and it shows what some of his core values are, because I guarantee you no political advisor told him to take that stand. Because if you list all of the issues that are important to voters out there, where the capital of Israel is or where our embassy is in Israel wouldn't hit the top 50 items on a lot of people's list of priorities, even Christians, even though they say it's important. So it's not something that he did because a political advisor said this would be really smart to do. He knew it was an important thing to do, and that's why he did it. You know, I worked for Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, and it was one of the things that Ted stood up for from the very beginning, and he was over there. I was there for on May the 14th or May the 15th when the embassy was opened in Jerusalem, and it was an amazing event. President Trump knew the importance of making that move, and he did it because it's the right thing to do to show our support for Israel. And I tell you what, it's going to end up working out to be politically smart for him as well, even though most political advisors wouldn't have thought so.
Just before we run out of time, let's talk about the fact that you're on the Trump Evangelical Leadership Council. So you might just share with us how we can pray for those of you that are providing counsel for him, and how can we pray for the president? It must be really difficult to get up every day and see the headlines. And then, of course, he doesn't help it sometimes with his tweets. We all understand that. But nevertheless, it's got to be difficult to be the president of the United States, especially this president of the United States. So how can we pray for him, and how can we pray for you?
Well, I tell you this, he values our input. I was honored to be part of a group of about 90 of us that joined the president for dinner at the White House on August the 27th. It was an amazing group of faith leaders from all around the country. It was myself, Jim Dobson, Tony Perkins, Kenneth Copeland, Franklin Graham. I could go on and on to try to name all these people that were there. And here's what's so special about it. This was the first ever dinner like this, and the dinner was literally named a celebration of evangelical leadership, not a celebration of faith leadership in general with a mix of Buddhists and Hindus and Christians and all these other groups. It was evangelical leadership because President Trump recognizes the importance of people of faith in general and specifically of evangelical Christians to this country. And he values our prayer support, and we need to stand with him because he's under attack every single day. Paula White Cain is a faith advisor to the president. She is there in the White House as a staff member now, leading the Evangelical Council and helping us to have input and advice on issues from Israel to life to judges to jobs in the economy. Every one of these issues, we have the ability to speak into this White House because of that council.
Well, just incredible. If you would like to know more about the work that Buddy Pilgrim is doing, we have a link to integrityleadership.org. You can simply go to our website and find that. And again, I would encourage you to be in prayer for our president, also in prayer for those that are providing that counsel. And Buddy Pilgrim, I know you got a busy day, so appreciate the fact that you would give us an hour today here on Point of View.
I am honored to be on your program anytime, Kerby. You're a blessing to everyone who listens.
Well, again, let's do it again. And I got a feeling we'll be calling him shortly after the election. But let me just mention real quickly that if you have not been clicking on our midterm election resources, they are available at our website, pointofview.net. As you click that first button, it then takes you to a state. Now, most of you listening right now probably are in the state of Texas or in Minnesota or a few other places. But wherever you are listening, you can click on that, and then it will give you the national races, if you have a Senate race, congressional races, and then maybe some of the statewide races. But then if you put in your zip code, you can actually go down and see some of the other races. On the right-hand side, not only do you have the iVoter Guide, but you also have the state voter guides from the various family policies that focus on the family. And then we have all sorts of election resources. It will take you a while, so take the time to go there, print it out, pass it on to others. We're going to take a break. Charles Sauer going to be with us right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to be spending some time today talking about why you do what you do, and some of the decisions, some of them are economic, some of them are personal, that really are affecting public policy. A book that a lot of people are talking about is entitled Profit Motive: What Drives the Things We Do. Now, when we talk about profits, we're really talking about more than just economic values. So we're talking about how people can profit, the benefits that come from that. And it has been endorsed by people like Governor Jeb Bush and T. Boone Pickens, who's just down the street from us. As a matter of fact, Grover Norquist, who's been on the program with before, has referred to it as the Ronald Reagan of economic books. John Goodman's been on the program with us before. We used to be with the policy organization, now with the Goodman Institute, has endorsed it. Stephen Moore has been on with us many times before, and it's really an attempt to try to begin to understand what drives the things that we do, which is the subtitle of the book. Charles Sauer is the economist and political specialist who has been involved in a variety of different outreaches. He, of course, runs the Market Institute, and also is an individual that contributes to such things as the Weekly Standard. In the past, he actually was working on Capitol Hill as the chairman of the Finance Committee. He also appears on a variety of different programs, including One America News, as well as The Big Picture with Tom Hartman, and joins us now by phone. Charles, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me on. I look forward to this.
You know, this book's made quite a splash. I mean, when you have everybody from a former governor of Florida to T. Boone Pickens, we broadcast here from Dallas, so we know him, and John Goodman, who's just been on the program many times as well. There's been kind of a who's who of people that really appreciate your book. And there is a sense in which, even though the title sounds like it's economics, it's really broader than that, because let's take us back to maybe the dictionary definition of profit. Profit can be economic profit, but there can be social profit, cultural profit, and you're using it in the broader sense, aren't you?
Yeah, I profit definitely, it has this kind of visceral reaction when people say it. It's kind of like the statement, greed is good. And one of the ways I came to the idea of the book was thinking of some of the writings of Ayn Rand and her virtue of selfishness. And, you know, I have some issues with some different parts of her thinking. And so the title came to me, but I wanted to make sure right up front that people understood that what I was referring to wasn't just this money profit, because really when you start looking at taking apart what it is that drives people, it honestly isn't money a lot of the times. And if you were just looking for money, the theory would actually fall apart. You know, people choose to take off work to spend more time with their families. That is, you know, the opposite of finding money or searching out or seeking money profit. And so I redefine it right off the bat. But the idea of the book is people are acting in their self-interest, and people are allowed to define what their own self-interest is.
Well, and again, if you go back to Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, written in 1776, he talked about the idea of self-interest as one of those aspects of a capitalist system. Now, sometimes people get confused. Like you said, they'll say, well, self-interest means selfishness. No, let's think this through. If you're in a family, it's in your self-interest, for example, to, let's say you're a teenager, to do your chores, because otherwise you might not get actually economic benefit, an allowance, but you might also not get freedom. That is, you might get grounded. And you can do that in a way that is in your self-interest. It's not selfish. However, if mom makes 4 muffins for dinner and there's 4 people in the family and you take 2 of them, well, that would be selfishness. So sometimes selfishness is part of self-interest, but everybody acts in their own self-interest. And again, I want people to understand we're not just talking about profits, because in your book you talk about the government. Well, government bureaucrats, they're not necessarily trying to make profits. You have a section there on non-profit organizations. By definition, they're not making a profit. So the profit motive is a little different than the way we may have learned about it in Economics 101. True?
Definitely, it's true. So the way that I like starting off to talk about this is because most of us understand the basic idea of that a business in general is in business to profit. They're in business to make money. But what we don't think about is that second layer of that, and that's that the employees are showing up at that business to make money as well. And that since the employees are showing up to make money, their motivations might not actually align with the business. Maybe
Yes.
they're just showing up to fill a desk and take home a paycheck. But as somebody who owns a business, if you understand that your employee is coming there to profit themselves, you can do things to figure out what it is that makes them happy. Maybe you don't have a ton of money to pay somebody. Maybe you don't have anything. Maybe you're just starting a business and you don't have any money to pay an employee. What is it that you can give somebody that benefits them? Maybe you can give them stock in your company, which plenty of startups do. Or maybe you can help introduce them to more people. And so the whole book is identifying the fact, going past the normal ideas of profit motives, knowing that businesses are there to profit, and looking at that second layer. And you started talking about governments. That's one of the ideas, or one of the thoughts that really helped solidify the book for me. And it's something that, working in Washington, D.C., I knew and I kind of understood, but I realized as I was talking to more and more people that they don't understand it. And as you hear the rhetoric of, some politicians that just want to keep building and building more and more government programs, they don't understand it. And that's that the person sitting, the bureaucrat at the desk, also has their own profit motive. Somebody that's sitting and running a public housing program might not, really want to provide housing to everybody. Maybe they just want to help provide housing to themselves. And so they go through the motions of their job in the way that most effectively provides housing for themselves. And depending on who their boss is, sometimes that is making sure that public housing is more available, or under other bosses, maybe it's figuring out how to save more money, and maybe that's not providing more public housing. So, I think that this is something that, as we dive and look at individual instances, that it's really interesting, and it helps you take apart a situation, a public policy program, family life. You went over the muffins. I would actually say if there's 4 muffins there and you grabbed 2 for yourself, even though there's only 4 family members, it might be selfish at the time to do that, but I would say it's actually not profit seeking, because you have to spend the rest of your life with these family members. And if you steal a muffin from them today, they might claim 2 from you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so the actual profit seeking, the way it would be done right, is to take one so that the next day you can have one as well, and maybe the next day, so other family members don't steal 2 and you lose out down the road. So, I mean, I kind of view some of these maybe a little bit differently, but I think it's fun. I think it's a way that we can discuss why people do what they do in an easier manner. And that's why, Jeb Bush got on board. That's why T. Boone Pickens got on board. Even Tom Hartman from the far left is on board with the book, because it's a good way to discuss things.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back. We'll talk about politics, media, healthcare, and even the family we were talking about a little bit ago. All part of the book, Profit Motive. We'll be right back after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You have probably heard comments about certain people living in a bubble. They live in affluent communities cut off from some of the realities that most Americans face. Due to the research by Charles Murray, we can now identify where these bubble communities are located. In his book, Coming Apart, he argued that a high IQ, highly educated upper class was formed over the last half century that is disconnected from the culture of mainstream America. Charles Murray put a quiz in his book that PBS decided to post online. More than 47,000 people posted their scores along with zip codes where they lived when they were 10 years old. Charles Murray did an analysis of the quiz data along with other data, and even though this is not a true representative sample of America, it does provide some interesting conclusions. Overall, it reinforces our general assumption that many of the leaders in politics, business, and the media grew up and often still live in bubble communities. For example, many of the bubbliest zip codes in America are located in New York or California. In New York City, they're found in the Upper West Side and Upper and Lower East Sides in Manhattan. They're also found in Brooklyn and the suburbs of New York. California has lots of bubble zip codes in the San Francisco region, as well as in the Silicon Valley and the Los Angeles region. We can also find lots of bubble zip codes in the Washington, D.C. area, especially in the suburban communities that house many of the politicians, bureaucrats, and other government officials that make policy decisions that affect our everyday lives. So I hope you share my concern that many of the people who have had such a significant influence in our daily lives live in a world with a very thick cultural bubble that separates them from the lives of ordinary Americans. This is not a positive demographic trend. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Charles Sauer. His book is entitled Profit Motive, What Drives the Things That We Do. And Charles, for just a minute, let's talk about business. We'll get into certainly government and all the way down to families in just a few minutes. But as I read your chapter there on corporate decision-making, I learned a little bit more about John D. Rockefeller. And here's a good illustration, because at the time in which he was in the oil business, to use one example, their oil was fairly cheap. Refiners didn't care about waste, and so all sorts of rivers are being polluted. But he thought, wait a minute, there's a better way to do that. Let's find some other byproducts of the refining process, which we benefit from today. Or even as he's walking through a factory, he notices the barrels are being constructed with a number of drops of solder, and he's asking, well, why is that being done, and found ways to save money. There was a sense in which he was using his profit motive, but he was also instructing some of the people beneath him to also try to be more efficient with the use of some of the resources that actually came through their hands.
Yeah, he was not a very nice man.
No,
he didn't understand. He didn't understand how people could be wasteful. He grew up not wasting money. In fact, he kept a ledger of kind of every penny that he spent for his whole life, and that helped him have the money and capital that he needed when he needed to invest it. But he wasn't. He was saving money by making sure that the right number of welds was on an oil can, but he was also looking at this overall picture and seeing that as this race to just get oil out of the ground wasn't the bigger picture. that he needed a brand, that he needed a company, and that he needed to really vertically integrate everything that he was doing. And so, you know, as he had the other people in the industry had this like small profit motive, right? They would go to work and they were trying to get the oil out of the ground as fast as they could.
Right.
And he saw that there was more to it. And he also saw, and this is, you know, it's a controversial part of what he did, but that if he got everybody together and grouped everybody, that they could also move the price up together. And by banding together, that they could all make more money. And, you know, so he went around and sold that idea to him. And it's really one of the things that really led to his power. But the reason he did that is that he understood that if he took the sales pitch to everybody, that they could make more profit, that then they would join him. And that really gave him the power that he needed to really take over the way that he did. But if he didn't understand that, you know, these guys were in business to make money, and he went to them and said, hey, you know, I've got this great idea that's going to make life easier for us. We just band together and you pay me more money. They wouldn't have done it. But instead, he went to them. He understood. He was a salesman. He understood that he needed to sell them something and give them an upside for why to join him. And that upside to the other oil guys was just pure money. I mean, we see this kind of over and over again. It's kind of interesting. Amazon recently just changed their minimum wage, and they increased it dramatically. But when they increased it, they took out bonuses. So they were bowing to kind of a public pressure to raise their minimum wage, but in doing so, it forced them to remove this bonus structure, which they really used to incentivize employees to act and perform. So it'll be interesting to track Amazon's production over the next couple of years. But it was interesting to follow this modern public debate over basically profit motive. Amazon had made a decision. They changed it because of public pressure, and there was still pushback from the employees because of removing these bonus structures that they'd come to like and enjoy.
Let me, if I can, just before I leave that chapter, get into the issue of cronyism, because that was, I think, insightful as well. Now, today we sometimes hear about cronyism on Capitol Hill or crony capitalism. But again, since we're talking about Rockefeller, talk about that for just a minute, because that, again, is an understanding of some of the principles you're trying to set forth here in the book, Profit Motive.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things when you listen to a public debate and you see that business supports some sort of large regulation, they support some sort of large government interference in what they're doing, you can generally see that doesn't make any sense for the company's bottom line. So that should send up these profit motive alarm bells. What's going on here? Well, Rockefeller did it. He could accept public regulation. In fact, he knew that he was growing so fast and so big that there was going to be regulation. So what he did was insert himself in the debate. So when regulation was put forward, it would be all right for him. And at its optimal point, it would be all right for him and bad for his competitors. But he understood it and got involved in the government and basically ran the cronyism and drove a lot of the legislation around the regulations. And we see that today. We see it, in net neutrality. We see it in intellectual property. We see it in a lot of places where the businesses, the large corporations in the country accept regulation because that they know that that's going to hurt the people that are coming up behind them, and they can keep their bottom line, and then they can be less fearful of competitors coming to push them out.
Interesting. Let's, if we can, since we're talking about cronyism, kind of relates to the next chapter where you spent some time having worked for Senator Bond from Missouri, and then, of course, Chuck Grassley from Iowa, and even Governor Jeb Bush in Florida for a while. But I love what you say. Each office was different, but in all of my time in their offices, I never saw the money or the effect of money. Now you say, now years removed from those experiences, I see how money and profit motive shaped what I was doing and what others in the office were doing, things I didn't understand at the time. It is so confusing, I think, for some of us that watch Washington, D.C. Having lived in Washington, D.C. when I went to Georgetown, I maybe understand it a little more than the average listener, but there are just some things that happen in Washington that make no sense to most of our listeners. And some of it is ascribed to the influence of big business, big pharma, lobbying, all the rest. Help us understand, now that you've spent some time in some of those offices, what indeed seemed to be taking place.
Yeah, it first off, I would say that anybody that has the time or the means or the access to come and spend an internship or spend time in Washington, D.C., it would be worth your while, because the inner workings and how the sausage is made is interesting and eye-opening and gives you a different visual. I mean, especially if you went to Georgetown, you were close enough to see how those things kind of happen and who the players are in it. But, in an office, the issues come to you. You have to make decisions on those issues. You make the decisions based on information and newspaper articles and what kind of the leaders are saying at the time, and you present that to your boss, and he then makes a decision either for you or against you. Well, we see issues kind of like I brought up intellectual property a second ago.
Yeah.
There was a bill passed in, I want to say it was 2011, called the American Invents Act. It sounds like a nice bill, but it really made it hard for inventors, especially small inventors, to bring their inventions to market. Its main thing, it changed the idea of first to invent to first to file. And so now you can't just invent the next best mousetrap in your garage and then mail the idea to yourself and be able to prove that you were the first one to do it. You have to invent it in the garage, and now you race to the USPTO with 20 grand to be able to buy the patent to defend yourself. Well, that bill passed in the Senate. I believe the vote was like 97-3. That's a higher vote margin than the Patriot Act. It passed in about the same margins in the House. And the idea was that there was a lot of people in the country, there's a lot of businesses that use intellectual property but didn't invent the intellectual property. So they were pushing this really behind the scenes, and it wasn't seen to many people, but, enough donations and enough time with members, and they were able to drive the debate. It's also something that most people probably heard about in the papers. This was the patent troll. This was where we saw the patent troll narrative kind of come from, were people that were pushing for this bill. And there is such a thing as people sending out fraudulent demand letters. I happen to call them Nigerian princes, because the fraudulent demand letters look about like what your Nigerian prince spam emails are. But it's really only 3 companies in Texas that send these out. So this is cronyism running rampant and really changing our innovation ecosystem.
Wow. A lot more in the book. Profit Motive. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Charles Sauer right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Charles Sauer. His book is entitled Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. He is, of course, with the Market Institute, and we have a link to marketinstitute.org in case you would like to find out a little bit more. There's a way that you can contact them. There's all sorts of information about media appearances and other things. And so if you'd like to know more about him or schedule him to come and speak to your group, you certainly can do so by going to our website, pointofview.net. We've been talking about the profit motive in business and in politics. We'll continue that for a little bit, but then also we want to look at this idea of profit motive in media, healthcare, even family. But I thought before we leave politics, Charles, another topic that I thought was very interesting is, we have a two-party system. You talk about that. And the profit motive drives decisions in a different sort of way. So if we make a distinction between left and right, what you talk about here is the big government left is worried about the profit motive of capitalists. They don't believe that people should make a profit from healthcare, education, whatever it might be. But then you have the small government right that don't want government involved because they want profit-driven capitalists to compete for the needs of the people. So what you end up with, as you say, is kind of a compromise that's the worst of all worlds. Can you explain?
Yeah, well, we've mistaken what compromise is, and one of the things in politics is that you need to get wins so you can go back home to your constituents and say, look, I won this debate. And so I think one of the things, I guess it's maybe easier to start off with, and we already talked about the fact that a lot of the left doesn't understand that the government bureaucrats or the government programs that they might want are run by bureaucrats, and those bureaucrats might not have the best intentions of that program at heart, or they might have them at heart, but they have their own profit motives, which is their family and their own personal drive for leadership or power in mind as well. On the right, a lot of the right talks about being pro-business, but they then legislate in a way that is pro-big business instead of pro-business in general, which would mean letting entrepreneurs really grow things. And the issue with that is that the lobbyists in town aren't from the small businesses, they're from the large businesses. So when they talk about a policy proposal, they're generally talking about a policy proposal for that benefits large businesses. Right. All right. So that sets the game. That's our players on the left and the players on the right. And they each come to the negotiation table, and their ideas of the correct solution are different. And so we just get this weird intermingling of things, and we'll talk about healthcare in a little bit, but it's really a good one here. So we have this really weird system now that, we have a giant Medicare system that actually Medicare doesn't provide any health care or any insurance. They contract that back out to Blue Cross and Blue Shield. So now we have money that goes into the government back out to a private program that reports back to the government, not to the people necessarily, or to the doctors necessarily. So we have the left likes it because we have this large insurance program. The right likes it because it's coming out back to the private sector. But the private sector isn't reporting back to the individuals. That means that the doctors aren't the clients, the patients aren't the clients, the government is the client. And so it's a compromise that was made, but it's the worst possible compromise. And we see this sort of thing happening issue after issue around the government. We make a policy between big government and free enterprise. And when you have both combined, it really causes some problems. So the two-party system, I like it. It's here to stay, but it has these compromise problems. It's not a compromise that makes the policy solution more effective. It's a compromise that makes their political ability go up, or their ability to go back home and get elected again. their profit motive, more likely to be fulfilled. So it's really not good for anybody, and it's something to watch out for when politicians start talking about compromise.
Well, when you talk about healthcare, let's get into that. Of course, John Goodman's talked about that before, and you have a section that's entitled Profit-Driven Healthcare for All. Of course, right now we're hearing the Democratic leadership talking about Medicare for all. And, of course, if you thought Medicare, the way it's convoluted now, is a mess, can you imagine when you aren't even paying into the system but drawing out of it? You have all these claims that we would have tens of trillions of dollars of expense, but how do we think about this? Is there a better way to go in terms of health care? How are the various stakeholders and those people with a profit motive going to work out a healthcare system that actually functions for the average person?
Well, fortunately, we're talking about the book, and I wrote the book, so I don't feel too bad saying this, but it's making sure that everybody's profit motives are aligned the right way. And right now,
yes,
the patient is not the payer for healthcare service in our current system. And so John Goodman has the book Patient Power. And the idea of that book is giving the patient the power of money, giving them the money in their pocket, the skin in the game, so that they go and pay the doctors and they can go search around. And that's his idea, which is widely successful now, the health savings account. So we need to look at every healthcare proposal and see where the money goes and if it gives the patient more power, if it gives the providers of the healthcare, the providers of the drugs, an incentive to pay attention to the patient. So right now you go to a doctor, you're paying 10 cents on the dollar for that visit to the doctor. You aren't the actual customer there. The customer for a normal trip to the doctor is the insurance company.
Yes.
So the doctor needs to figure out how to input you into the system and write everything down so that their actual client, the insurance company, knows how to pay them, or their actual client, if you're in Medicare, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, the insurer can bill Medicare correctly for your health care. So any system that we implement needs to pay attention to that. And it's interesting to me. So I actually worked for Dr. Goodman at the National Center for Policy Analysis and the Goodman Institute. But I founded with a group of people a few years ago the Free Market Medical Association, and one of the guys in there is Dr. Keith Smith. I talk about him in the book, but he put his prices online.
Right.
And the healthcare system is so messed up that his healthcare prices are 10% of what you pay at the local hospital.
Isn't that just amazing? I know.
It's amazing.
It blows your mind, you know, but again, it illustrates that. You go into Starbucks right now, not that I want to pay that much money for hot water and beans, but, you know, if you did, you at least know what the price is. But you walk in, there have been times I walked into my doctor and just say, what's it going to cost? And they look at me like I'm from Mars. Like, well, nobody's ever asked that, or we don't know how to answer that question. What? That shows who is the customer and who's not, right?
Well, let's say that instead of having a Starbucks, you opened up a Star Sense down the street, right? And instead of paying $3 at Starbucks, you pay 30 cents at your shop. You would assume that business would start flowing in your direction. Well, healthcare, the market is so messed up that when he posted these prices online, and he was known in the community, the best doctors practiced at a surgery center, business didn't just start flowing to him because the normal price incentives or price labeling, as you said, aren't there. It actually took a local third-party administrator, basically an insurer that bundles together other small businesses in the area. It took them to recognize that his prices were so low and start directing their clients towards Keith Smith. And that's when it took off. And so that was about a year after the passage of Obamacare.
Right.
And now there's, I think, 50 different free market clinics down in that Oklahoma, Texas corridor that are all listing their prices and really starting to cause a difference in the healthcare market down in that area. And it's slowly now moving across the country. We have people in Virginia. There's ones out in California. I know of startups in, I think, Wyoming and North Dakota. So it's starting to move, but it's actually seen this free market growth is slow normally, and the healthcare market, it's even slower because it's just still the incentives are so incorrectly placed.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, just real quickly, we will pick out just a couple other chapters, because when you hear profit motive, you don't think of media. You don't think of nonprofits. You don't think of family. So I thought we'd pick those off real quickly. And because we're doing media, and because, after all, Charles is in the media, there is a place where that profit motive shows up again in kind of a bizarre way. So we'll talk about that. And if you would like to know more about him, again, we have a link to the Market Institute on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that, among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that the school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Charles Sauer with us as we talk about his book, Profit Motive. And I thought we might focus just a little bit of time on the media. As I introduced you today, I mentioned the fact that you've appeared on One America News as well as on with Tom Hartman. And there's a difference between the two shows, which I'll let you explain in just a minute. But here's another place where you can see this idea of profit motive. And once you read the book, first of all, there's a couple of laugh out loud kind of stories in the media of your experiences, but nevertheless, it might help us for the first time understand these talking head shows where sometimes, in your case, you're in a studio talking to a camera, and I've done that before. It's like, you know, you might as well be talking to a brick wall because you don't see the person, but you're supposed to look confident, not nervous, and all the rest. And the goal there is to make you look good. when you're on with Tom Hartman, of course, he's a liberal, so he's going to show that he can, match anything you guys have to say. But explain how the profit motive kind of surfaces in these different forums and venues.
Yeah, I mean, media is a weird, is a love-hate thing. First off, it seems to take a lot of time, and there's this high-pressure thing where you're getting out there in the public and you're going to put your name on some policy that's going to be able to sit out there forever. And, if you ever decide to run for office, it's going to possibly pop back up against you. And then all of a sudden weird things happen. Like one of the times I was in there, my earpiece fell out. So it sounded like I had a 1-inch tall guy talking on the back of my collar during the whole interview instead of actually hearing him in my head. But it's interesting when you watch these shows because the talking heads aren't paid. And if most of them aren't paid. On Fox News, actually, a lot of them are paid now. But on the morning shows, they come and talk. And the idea there is that they're on there for some reason. They're on there to sell you an idea. In fact, I'm on here to sell you books, right? So if we understand why we're here, then if the listeners understand why somebody's on the show, then it can at least give them a better idea of what's going on. But the fact is if I just came on and the only thing that I said was buy my book and we didn't actually have a conversation that had any substance, A, probably nobody would buy the book, but B, you probably wouldn't have me on again. And so there's this give and take of, these talking heads go onto a show to do something and provide a message and provide a viewpoint that they're being paid for by somebody. And the producers are having them on and the shows are having them on because they make good TV. So it's just something to understand this background nature of how bookings occur, why you're seeing people on TV, and understanding that they're not just on there to provide information to you. They're on there for some reason that's going to help them provide for their family, get a better job, buy a bigger house. They're on there for their own profit somehow, some way. And again, I define profit broadly. So sometimes you can see some people on that might just be trying to, maybe they're getting donations for their church, or they're bringing more notability to a project they're working on. But it's likely that they're on there for a bigger paycheck, more notoriety for what they're doing so that they can do other big business.
Sure. Which brings us to one other issue, because you have a whole section here on the for-profit, nonprofit, and you've had individuals say, wait a minute, I run a nonprofit. Yeah, well, again, if you understand profit motive in the broadest sense, even nonprofit organizations, churches, charitable organizations, other kinds of philanthropic organizations, they are motivated by a profit motive. Maybe not necessarily a financial profit, although they certainly could benefit from the donations to that organization. But there's a profit motive even in nonprofits, aren't there?
Yeah, and this one, it kind of, especially when I talk about churches, it hits close to home. It even hit too close to home for me. So I actually went and had to go get, I went a little bit too hard at churches and had to get a friend of mine that I went to high school with, who's now a pastor down in Texas, that I knew would understand what I was trying to say and wasn't accomplishing right. But she has a long quote in the book talking about how they raise money for their church.
Sure.
And how they do it by letting people know what they're doing and why they are doing it the way that they're doing it. My wife's church in Kansas, we live in D.C. now, but she helped build a church in Kansas, and they made a lot of investments in property at the time and needed capital to do that. So they raised money early, but now the church is doing really well because they have these great investments in land and property. But in religion, something that you have your beliefs in, I think it's important for people to understand that when they're giving money, there's generally some sort of a motivation behind it. Like if you don't pay your pastor, they're not going to be able to be your pastor for very long, except for some of the religions where it's a volunteer thing. And I actually find that really refreshing in in a religion. But when you start talking about public policy nonprofits, or even helping nonprofits, the one I refer to in my book is a nonprofit. I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but it helps inventors. And what you end up doing is they have a board that's full of people that provide services to inventors. So the way that they make their money at the end of the day is by selling inventors that their services are important and good and helpful for them. So, you know, they provide this nonprofit that brings in inventors to provide education, but then everybody involved has this extra bit where they actually try to make money off of these inventors. So, you know, that happens in nonprofits all over the place. It's not just this one. And I've seen, even since I wrote the book, the nonprofit that I was talking about has changed dramatically. So that kind of goes in ebbs and flows, but it's always a question that you need to ask yourself, where is this nonprofit getting its funding from? Why are they doing what they're doing? And is any of that not in my self-interest? And, you know, sometimes we're not in a situation to ask that, but it's at least a thought that you can run through your head so that you can defend yourself against the bad actors. And we need to do that on religion as well.
Well, and even there with Teen Boom Pickens, you talk about some of the other nonprofits that are more kind of the secular nonprofits, or in every case, you've really tried to look at some of those issues. But before we go, let me just mention that we have a link to marketinstitute.org, and let's talk about what's available there, because somebody might want to book you on a program or have you speak to a chamber of commerce or a business group or something like that, or would like to get more information. What will they find when they land on your website?
Well, I think the most important thing you'll find on my website is my contact information. I love talking to people, so my email's on there. Please send me emails. I'm happy to come speak to organizations, but you'll also find the types of writing and the things that we do. But the most important thing on that website is my contact information. I hope everybody feels free to contact me.
Well, Charles, I appreciate you giving us some time. I know that you're getting some visibility on the book, and we certainly gave you an hour today to kind of explain a little bit more about the profit motive. More than 200 pages, no way we could cover all of it, but I think we've done a pretty good job, and so thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you for giving me time.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will get into a couple of other issues. But let me just mention we have those election resources, and if you have not taken the time to click that button, when you do so, it is, again, going to educate you about the midterm election, and as you click it, you will see a map of the United States. Now, click on your particular state, and it will pop up. If you have a Senate race, it'll certainly pop up any state races there. And then if you put in your zip code, it will take you further down to many other races. And on the side, there's also, of course, a connection to the Focus on the Family Policy Voter Guides, so take the time to find those as well. A lot of resources. We want you to cast an intelligent vote, and you can do so by going to pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife, Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country, but I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend a little bit of time talking with our good friends from the Fellowship of Christian Athletes about Fields of Faith. Then we're going to get into, just before we wind down the program today, a look at where we stand on the elections. We're going to look at a couple of the senatorial elections. Those are very important because it will determine if indeed some of these judicial nominees that have been put forward by Donald Trump, whether those will go through or whether Democrats control the Senate and prevent that from taking place. Also, my commentary today is about bubble situations in which we find ourselves living in a bubble zone, and what does that mean? So I've got a lot to cover, so we will certainly try to do that all in this hour. And if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Especially love to hear from you in the first half hour here as we talk with our friends from Fellowship of Christian Athletes. If you've been involved in an FCA event, perhaps you've even been at one of the annual Fields of Faith, which we'll be talking about, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We bring to the microphone Jeff Martin. He serves as the Executive Director of Ministry Advancement. Before actually having that position, he was in Oklahoma for many years, was the FCA Area Director in Lawton, Oklahoma, and that's where he founded Fields of Faith. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. He and his wife and kids live now in Overland Park, Kansas. And so, Jeff, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
It's great to be here. Really enjoy talking about Fields of Faith and what God has done over the years through that.
Well, let's, if we can, let's take you back to 2008. There you are kind of the area director for Oklahoma. You prayed about, in a sense, kind of what to do regarding some of the temptations that the young people face, some of the spiritual battles that they were in the midst of, and you went to 2 Chronicles 34 for an answer. Tell us the rest of the story, if you might.
Yeah, it was many times things that God brings a movement comes out of frustration, and that's really where I was. And I have three kids, three that are grown up now, but at that point they were getting ready to enter into junior high, and I had been in ministry over 10 years, and just I was real frustrated one day from the fact I felt like, you know, culture continued to go backwards, and the challenges, it just seems like it's getting worse. I was like, what am I doing? You know, like, I'm a part of this, you know, the church that God left, and to take the gospel to the world, and are we taking ground? And I just felt like we weren't. And now it becomes real personal when your kids are walking into into a culture, and I was just frustrated. Like, what? It just seems like we're losing. And so at my quiet time that day, I happened to be reading out of 2 Chronicles 34, and it got my attention because it talked about King Josiah, who was in Judah, that had lost the scriptures. There were no scriptures, and so it was a godless society, basically. And I'm like, yeah, that's sort of where I think we're headed, you know. And as I read through that, it starts talking about, well, he did what he could. He was an influential when he started when he was young, and as he was going through his teen years, he knew to at least start cleaning out temples and trying to clean. He did what God was moving in his heart, and he did what he knew. And during that time, so I'm looking at that, and then it says, well, they found a book as he was cleaning out the temple, and they bring it to him, and he reads it, and it's the Word of God. And so he reads that, and he realizes where they are, where that country is, and he confesses that, and he does something interesting. He brings everyone together. He went and brought everyone together in one place, read the book of the law to them, said this is where I'm going to stand and we're going to stand. And as I read through that, it says that Judah followed the book of the law as long as Josiah was alive. And so I just looked at that, and it's something like, oh my gosh, the game changer there was the Scripture, and to be able to see where to go and what we're doing wrong and what we need to be doing, and it affected that culture from a godless society to one that followed the law. And so my thought was, could we run that same play now? And this is the question that was in my mind. What's the difference in a country that has no Scripture and doesn't read it, in a country that has many Scriptures but doesn't read it?
Yes, good question.
The end result is the same, correct?
Yes.
A godless society. And so that started this quest of, are we really reading the Word of God? Or are we just spectating, right? Going to events and things like that. And so from that was birthed this idea. What if we could do what Josiah did, gather a lot of people in one place, and then have influential young people talk about how the Word of God had changed their life, and give a challenge to their peers to do the same, to read the Word of God, allow that to change their life, and then also to share their personal faith, how they came to know Christ, and the challenge to do that. So that's where that came from. And what we thought was, there's really only one place left in our communities, and that where everyone gathers together, regardless of race, creed, background, in anything, beliefs, and it's really stadiums, in local stadiums or in regional stadiums where people join together to cheer on, they unite around something like that. So why not go where they're already comfortable doing that, and then let's do something crazy. Let's give these students the mic and let them speak to each other. And it was all based on what happened in 2 Chronicles 34. So that's where the idea came from. And we went out and said, let's try this out. And that's how it started.
Well, again, it's been so successful. It was at, I guess, the 15th annual. And again, it probably illustrates something, Jeff, that we've talked about before, even with Greg Laurie, because a lot of people say, well, stadium evangelism, that's passe. Well, don't tell that to the Harvest Ministries that are actually having all sorts of outreaches. Don't tell that to FCA, which has been able to bring thousands and thousands of students together just on these school athletic fields. And what an incredible impact that's having. So we're coming up to a break. So maybe when we come back from the break, let's, if we can, maybe talk about how people can get involved in that, where they can find a field of faith, where they could create one, and some of those kinds of things. But if you find yourself saying, I didn't even know anything about this, first of all, we've done a couple of things. We've posted an article, just one that appeared about this earlier in October. Then we have information that takes you to the actual fieldsoffaith.com website, which you can go to, which explains what it is, how to find a field, how to share your experience, and all those kinds of things. And then just I hope that you'll consider going to that section where it gives you an opportunity either to attend a field, to host a field, to register a field. And we're going to continue to emphasize this as much as we can, because this is just a great opportunity for you to do this in your local community. And if you'd like to know more about Jeff, of course, we have a link to his website as well, talking about, of course, the work that he does as ministry advancement, and also an individual that also has a Master's of Divinity from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and now lives, of course, in Overland Park with our good friends at Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So let me take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how you can get involved, because this isn't just information. I hope it will be motivation for you to go out there and make a difference, and to recognize that you can just use that athletic field, and that can be, in a sense, sacred ground, holy ground, a place to really make a difference in this generation. So let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Jeff Martin right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You have probably heard comments about certain people living in a bubble. They live in affluent communities cut off from some of the realities that most Americans face. Due to the research by Charles Murray, we can now identify where these bubble communities are located. In his book, Coming Apart, he argued that a high IQ, highly educated upper class was formed over the last half century that is disconnected from the culture of mainstream America. Charles Murray put a quiz in his book that PBS decided to post online. More than 47,000 people posted their scores along with zip codes where they lived when they were 10 years old. Charles Murray did an analysis of the quiz data along with other data, and even though this is not a true representative sample of America, it does provide some interesting conclusions. Overall, it reinforces our general assumption that many of the leaders in politics, business, and the media grew up and often still live in bubble communities. For example, many of the bubbliest zip codes in America are located in New York or California. In New York City, they're found in the Upper West Side and Upper and Lower East Sides in Manhattan. They're also found in Brooklyn and the suburbs of New York. California has lots of bubble zip codes in the San Francisco region, as well as in the Silicon Valley and the Los Angeles region. We can also find lots of bubble zip codes in the Washington, D.C. area, especially in the suburban communities that house many of the politicians, bureaucrats, and other government officials that make policy decisions that affect our everyday lives. So I hope you share my concern that many of the people who have had such a significant influence in our daily lives live in a world with a very thick cultural bubble that separates them from the lives of ordinary Americans. This is not a positive demographic trend. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to keep Jeff here for just a little bit longer, so perhaps if you would like to share a testimony of being involved with FCA, or maybe you've been involved in a huddle or one of these particular fields of faith, we'd love to hear from you. If not, just sit back and pay attention, but hopefully we'll encourage you to find one of these opportunities, find a field to get involved, and then maybe even to use the hashtag FOF18, which stands, of course, for Fields of Faith 18. Jeff, there are a lot of questions I suspect many of our listeners have. There are a few that maybe are familiar with Fellowship of Christian Athletes and maybe have been involved with a huddle. But talk about what is available, because we have some links to different websites, and if people want to maybe be involved in their local community, get their children or grandchildren involved, or if they want to know about where there is a field of faith that's near them and how they can be involved, tell us what would be the ways in which we'd find that information.
Yeah, Kerby, there's the best way to find out about opportunities is just we have a website that we do it, we connect everyone with to get questions answered, look at where different events are, how can you do that, et cetera, and that is fieldsoffaith.com. And when you go to fieldsoffaith.com, you can find a field where that's happening. You can find out information of if you wanted to run one, that information is there, how to connect, how to do that. It has just a variety of ways to engage with that opportunity. And Kerby, one of the things that we shoot towards one day, it's the second Wednesday of October. Now, that's already passed, but there's a lot of Fields of Faith that happen in communities based on what works best.
Right.
But we see a lot of momentum around. We use the terminology one day, one message, one stand, and people, it just creates a lot of momentum. But there's a wide variety to be able to apply that same, the same principles of having a Fields of Faith event at different times during the year. So all of that information is sitting there at fieldsoffaith.com, and up to this point, we've probably had well over 200,000 people at over 500 stadiums already, and there's still more happening. So just definitely go and look there and see if that's something that God might move in your heart to be a part of, either planning one or attending one.
Well, again, let me encourage you, because it has happened in the past for many, but you still can produce something in the future. Of course, that one on October 10th, but there's no reason you couldn't do that at other times of the year, and I would encourage you to do so. I recognize some of our listeners in the northern zip codes might say, well, we're going to get snow pretty soon, so getting out in the field might be a little bit tougher, but you can also be planning for the future. And I want to give everybody some marching orders, and one of those is on that website, fieldsoffaith.com. You have a piece that's about a minute and a half long, almost 2 minutes long. It's a video. And I always encourage, Jeff, that when we have a video that's available, for people to go and watch the video about taking a stand, and then to click that share button, which you can do, and then put it on your Facebook page and start a conversation. Because this is something which I wanted to use to educate our national audience about the fact that though, it really began first in Oklahoma, now it's happened all over the country, still there are lots of individuals that are saying, maybe for the first time, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Fields of Faith. This is something I would love to see if we could try to organize for the kids in our community. And let's face it, every junior high school, every high school that has a field. So, you don't have to think about the venue. The venue's already set there for you. There's already stands. There's already a microphone. There's all sorts of things that are instantaneously available to you if you can get kids out. And so it seems to me that this is something that is easy to do and has the same kind of impact, I would say, as See You at the Pole or some of these evangelistic outreaches. And here, to have young people sharing their faith and what it means to be a Christian with other young people is something we need to do, don't you think?
Yes, and it's easily transferable. That's the beauty of this. And we just saw in Kenya, Africa, that at a stadium that there was a Fields of Faith event. We had one in South Korea, one in Vietnam. So it's something that, again, is easily transferable because there's stadiums all around the world, and there's people who have an opportunity to share their faith with their peers, and that's the powerful thing about it. So yes, it's something that anyone can do, and that's what I think that's what makes it so attractive to the community and to peers, to be able to hear from each other and to be challenged by someone that they identify with that's living out their faith, and to be able to do that in a very comfortable atmosphere, which is a local stadium.
Well, a lot of the key to this is to connect up with your local FCA. So the first issue is fca.org. There is a link that we also have there that says to get involved. But you can find out more about some of the huddles. I would imagine that some of our listeners maybe don't even realize there's a coaches ministry, there are camps, international trips. There's just all sorts of things that FCA is doing. So before I take a phone call, talk about what is at least some other ways in which people can get involved.
Yes, so FCA has been around since 1954, and we have a variety of ways, environments that coaches and athletes gather together. There's huddles, and that's on campus, and then in club and sports teams, wherever coaches, athletes gather, they can gather together in a huddle and talk about their faith, and that runs through a competitive lens, and they can read the scripture together and talk about their faith and grow and be be encouraged as an athlete, as a competitor, and for coaches as well. Coaches ministry to where they can do the same thing in huddles. We have camps. There's a variety of outreach events, a lot of ways to get involved in the sports community to share the gospel.
Again, fca.org. Let's head real quickly to South Carolina, WAGP. Virgil, I think you want to share a story, so go for it.
Yeah, I just want to commend Jeff on allowing God to put this on his heart. We just had our Field of Faith the third week in October, and it turned out great. We had maybe roughly about 400, maybe even 500 people to attend. Many gave their life to the Lord. Maybe a third of that possibly came down and committed themselves to the Lord. And the following week, our youth pastor at our church, I'm the one that shared the gospel out there, and our youth pastor ran me down and was like, hey, a guy at Field of Faith gave his life to the Lord. He came out the front lines, which is our youth ministry at our church. On Thursday, he said he felt God was leading him to come to our church. And he also came out to church the following Sunday. So, it's a great tool in which to use to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We even had parents come down, committed themselves to the Lord on that night. So It turned out beautiful. I love the idea. They've even asked me now to be a part of the huddle FCA has. And this is my first time hearing of it. They asked me to speak out there, and it turned out great. And I was challenged by it. And I know those that were out there, the adults that were out there, they were challenged by it as well. So I said, kudos, man. Praise God, and keep pressing, brother.
Well, appreciate you taking the time to go share your testimony. That, I think, Jeff, illustrates exactly why people need to get involved. I hadn't even thought about that. You know, parents that come and watch and say, what is this all about? And they come and come forward as well. So fieldsoffaith.com. Again, help us understand what we can do. Obviously, a lot of this has happened in October, but I don't think we have to wait till next October 2019 to have another Field of Faith, do we?
Right, yeah, and that's the thing. And Virgil, I really appreciate that. And one of the things he brought up is the churches uniting together around one night. That's another thing that we've seen is this unity in a community with the churches saying, "Hey, we're gonna get together and all join arms together." And that's a powerful thing because that many times that's difficult to do. And so everyone looks around and sees each other in the one place, and that's what Virgil was mentioning. And then the ability for anyone who makes a decision is like, those churches are there, we're coming there, and that's what it's all about. And the last thing is that the parents, we get stories of parents that are just sitting in the parking lot, maybe drop their kids off, or they're in the community and they're listening over the loudspeaker to what's being said, and they come to Christ. They walk up and go, I need to make I've been listening over the loudspeaker in the parking lot. So really, really amazing things. But yeah, just back to this can be done anywhere at any time, and there's just some simple downloadable manual.
Yes.
A simple, it's there that they can access at any time, and then just getting key community leaders together and say, hey, we would like to do this. And it's like I said, it's very transferable, and can do it during the winter. And if you want to, you can go inside and do it at a court. Doesn't matter, but an athletic facility is the preferred way to do it.
Well, again, fieldsoffaith.com. Jeff Martin's been with us. Jeff, thank you so very much. And let me encourage you to visit that website, to watch that video, and to post it on your website. And I would encourage you to go out there and schedule one of these events. We'll take a break. We got a lot more to cover. All that coming up right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, I'd love to hear from you, 1-800-351-1212, because one of the things we're going to talk about are the midterm elections. I don't spend a lot of time each day talking about it, because certainly a lot of other talk shows do, and we really don't know. We can look at the polls and recognize that some of the polls are more accurate than others, and if you happen to live in the state of Texas or Florida, you probably have been inundated with polls. Those are two states where there had just been a number of consecutive polls. There are other places where there's hardly been any polls at all. For our listeners in Mississippi, I should say first, is a good example of that, because that one's pretty straightforward. Everybody kind of knows the polls in Utah. Again, same. Most people think Mitt Romney's going to win in a walk. So those are not where there are a lot of polls. But I just said Missouri a minute ago. Missouri would be another one. Tennessee would be another one. There's a couple of states, certainly Arizona, which are very, very close. Now, again, I'm going to look at the Senate races primarily for one reason, because the article we've posted is that, and because it has such a significance, as Don McLaughlin in the piece that we've posted points out, that it is important if you are concerned about confirming originalist judges, if you're concerned about cabinet replacements, because let's face it, after this election, there are going to be a number of cabinet officers that are going to step down. Many people actually are quite willing to serve in any administration, a Republican or Democratic administration, but not for 4 years and certainly not for 8 years. So there are going to be the need to replace certain cabinet officers. And if indeed Democrats control the Senate, those nominations for cabinet offices, for federal district judge, federal circuit courts, or Supreme Court are going to be held up much more dramatically if you have a Democratic-controlled Senate. So Don McLaughlin, I'll give you the bottom line first, and we'll see how we get there, suggests that there could be a Republican pickup of 1 or 2, but there is all the reason to believe that it could be a tie as well. The likelihood of there being Democratic pickup is less likely. So let's work our way through some. There are a number of states where you have Republicans who are running for re-election. That would be Ted Cruz running against Representative O'Rourke. That one looks like he will win, but you have to be careful about that because it's within just a few percentage points. In Tennessee, of course, this is a change now from a previous individual to now it looks like Marsha Blackburn will win in Tennessee. But again, that's close enough to be careful about making that statement. There are a number of others where you are certainly not sure. Florida, Missouri, Nevada, Arizona, Indiana. A lot of them are really fairly close. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. And the one obvious switch from Republican to Democrat seems to be taking place right now in North Dakota. This looks like Kramer will beat Heitkamp, and so that is significant as well. So a lot of those have to do with whether or not Arizona, which has been Republican, either goes to Marsha McSally or Sinema. And then some of those close races, you could talk about Missouri, which I just mentioned a minute ago. Again, you have Josh Hawley, Claire McCaskill, and so those are some of those races that people are looking at in terms of the Senate. If you were guessing right now, based upon the polls, and again, I will say it like I say so many times, the only poll that really matters is the poll that will be taken next Tuesday. But if you can say that polls seem to be consistent, and these polls have been somewhat accurate in the past performance is no guarantee of future predictions, but it's a better comfort zone. It would suggest that Republicans will retain control of the U.S. Senate. That brings us to the House of Representatives. You can come up with about 30 to maybe 35 various races that are very competitive. For Democrats to take over, they're going to have to turn about 23 of those Republican-held congressional seats into Democratic seats, and some of those are pretty close. I'm broadcasting actually in a place which is the 32nd Congressional District, and that one, Pete Sessions has been on the program before, is a possible flip. Culbertson in Texas is a flip. Some of the most significant races right now, which I think will spell the difference in terms of whether or not the House is controlled by the Democrats or the Republicans, is going to take place in the state of California. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. But I would encourage you to read this particular piece by Dan McLaughlin, because if nothing else, what he is trying to do is very carefully try to analyze this. It will only take you a couple of pages to print out, and you then will have access to the kind of information that I look at. And you might say, okay, why should I trust him over someone else? Well, 4 years ago, when we had the midterm elections, he nailed it right on the button. And so, again, past performance doesn't guarantee predictability this time, but he tends to explain how he does this. And let me explain that for just a minute, because when you hear people say, I think this person's going to win, is it just a gut feeling, or are there some factors? And the first is, as he says, while public polls are far from infallible, they can tell us something about the state of a race, and there are a number of ways to test how much they can tell us, such as the size of the lead. Let's take, for example, North Dakota for just a minute. Kramer is 54% to 42%. So that's a lead of more than 12 points already on the most recent one, and it could even get larger before it's through. Number two, whether either candidate has cleared the 50% barrier. Recognize if you get 50%, by definition, you're going to win. And I can use some good examples of that because, again, when you look at certain individuals that are running, Mitt Romney is technically only at, 47%, but he's looking at the Democratic senator that's looking at maybe, or now I guess he's at 57%, is at 24%. You can see that once you've passed the 50% barrier, and I just mentioned that with Kramer, you could mention that with Barrasso in Wyoming, and a variety of others. So again, that's an important issue. Then he also says, if not, how many undecideds remained? And that's important because then some people start looking at, okay, how many are undecided? If it's a very small percentage, in the case of some of those individuals, I'll use the state of Texas, you have 95.5% essentially that have made up their mind. So you're down to about 4% undecided. At that point, you have to say, okay, are all 4% of them are going to go to one candidate or the other? Would 4% make up the difference? It could if all the undecideds went that way. So that's how you look at those particular polls. Then, of course, you look at another question, he says, how many polls have been taken in the race? For those of you in, as I said before, Florida, Texas, Arizona would be another one. I mean, it's like, is there a poll every single day? Just as amazing how many of these polls are recent. And then a couple of other issues, where the country stands, where the state stands, who was the previous senator, those kinds of things. And so it's a little more detailed than maybe you would like, but there's a nice kind of summary graph that helps you kind of get a sense of what is taking place. So if you're in one of those states, first of all, I think there is a very obvious application. Number one, if you have voted, congratulations. If you have not voted and you're still looking for more information, let me encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says View Election Resources, and certainly that is a place where you can get information. But again, I recognize most of you on the Point of View audience probably have made up your mind a long time ago, probably have that good information, probably a good number of you have already voted. So now your action item is to find some like-minded individuals who agree with you on the major issues and make sure that they have voted or that they have a way to get to the polls, either for early voting, which will take place today and tomorrow, or next Tuesday. So again, there are some action items for you, and if you have some people that really are that undecided, as I look down these various ones, I use Texas as an example, about 4% undecided. Let me tell you something that nobody normally tells you. If they're undecided at this point, after all these ads, they're not voting. So again, that's another thing you need to understand as well. But again, if you have some people that really are planning on voting, they're still undecided, maybe not about a Senate race, maybe not about a congressional race, but they say, I really don't know my state senator. I don't know my state representative. I don't know too much about the governor, the state secretary of state, or the attorney general, whatever. Those kinds of resources are available at our website, pointofview.net. So I thought I'd just give you a brief overview. At this point, if you were guessing, the assumption is the Republicans will retain control of the Senate. It's a lot more of a toss-up in terms of the House of Representatives. And you may make the difference because your vote might be the difference. Let's take a break. We'll take some more comments right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show, but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that the school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and I thought many of you were saying, okay, I want to hear about something other than politics, and certainly I do as well. My commentary today is entitled Living in a Bubble. It comes from some work by Charles Murray, who's been on the program with us before. In his book, Coming Apart, he argues that a high IQ, highly educated upper class was formed really in the last half century, from about 1950 on, that is completely disconnected from mainstream America. And so when we talk about the media elite, when we talk about the political elite, when we talk about the academy, we oftentimes are talking about individuals that really are disconnected from you and me. Now, I recognize that we broadcast in a lot of different venues, but a lot of the places we broadcast are not these places that are the bubbliest zip codes. So I'm going to give you a quiz here, and you can kind of see how you do. And, of course, if you're interested, you can find our website and go from there. But Charles Murray put a quiz in his book, Coming Apart, a couple of years ago. And then PBS decided to kind of post it online and let you take it, so you can do that. More than 47,000 people a number of years ago posted their scores. I don't know what the number is now because I wrote this a while back. And then they posted where their zip code was. And what they found, no surprise, the bubbliest zip codes, in other words, the places where they had the thickest bubble, where they were insulated from reality, were in places like New York and California. In New York City, they were in the upper west side, the upper lower east sides of Manhattan. California, it was like in the San Francisco region, Silicon Valley, things like that. But also some of the bubble zip codes were in Washington, D.C., and that's the problem. People that are making decisions about what you see, read, and hear in the media, and people that are making decisions about the laws that you have to live under, really don't live in your world. So let me just give you a couple of the questions and even explain why they are asked. One of the questions was, have you ever lived for or at least a year in an American neighborhood in which a majority of your 50 nearest neighbors did not have a college degree? Because what they found is in this one of the census, about 92% of Americans lived in zip codes with a majority of adults 25 and older who did not have a college degree. But if you live in a bubble area, if you will, a bubbliest zip code, everybody's a college graduate, which gets to the next question. Did you grow up in a family in which the chief breadwinner was not in a managerial position or a high prestige profession like an attorney, a physician, a dentist, an architect, an engineer, scientist, or college professor? Because, again, we see that the percentage of households in which chief breadwinners were not in one of those positions was about 85% in 1960, still about 75% in 2010. Have you ever lived a year in an American community with a population under 50,000 that is not part of a metropolitan area, not where you went to college? So you're thinking about individuals that grew up basically in a smaller township. And again, we can see that that represents a very significant number of individuals, a majority, I think it's like 58%. But for people that have lived all their lives in New York City, all their lives in San Francisco or Los Angeles or wherever, they've never experienced something that would be like a small town. Have you ever walked on a factory floor? That's interesting because, again, you recognize there are a lot of individuals that have never been to a factory. I worked in a machine shop, so I guess that qualifies, and I've been in other factories as well, but there are people that have never, ever been to a factory, ever. And again, just think about politicians that have never been to a factory. Now, again, I'll give credit to where credit is due. There are a number of politicians over the years that made it a point of really going and trying to do different jobs. Senator Graham out of Florida fits into that category, and others that said, I really want to understand what it's like to sort of experience that. Of course, if you've ever seen the program Dirty Jobs, that's all about that. Let me see if I can pick a couple more here. Have you ever had a close friend who was an evangelical Christian? I imagine almost all of you could say yes. But again, understand this, that in the Pew Forum survey of religious landscape, of a sampling of more than 35,000, 26% of the respondents said they were affiliated with evangelical Protestant churches, the single largest category. But there was, interestingly enough, a significant number of people that have never met an evangelical Christian. Many of those individuals, interestingly enough, are in the media. So you can consider that the only thing they know about evangelical Christianity is how it is, I think, wrongly portrayed in the media. And so that, I think, is kind of an interesting thing. Do you ever have a close friend with whom you have strong and wide-ranging political disagreements? Because, again, this is back to the idea of the big sort. We tend to hang around people that are just like us, and though certainly that is the case. I love this one. During the last month, have you voluntarily hung out with people who are smoking cigarettes? You know, that gets us into one. For those of you in the military, this will make you groan a little bit. They have one where they show different things that show the military ranks. Again, do you know what military ranks are denoted by these insignias? A little bit later, there's a question, if I remember right, on have you ever worn a uniform? And wearing it in a play does not qualify, but have you ever been in a uniform? I love this one. Do you know who Jimmy Johnson is? Well, NASCAR people go, yeah, I know who that is. Anybody else goes, oh, you know. Have you ever purchased Avon products? Have you or your spouse ever bought a pickup truck? Again, there are just a number of individuals that have not only never ridden in a pickup truck, they've never seen a pickup truck except maybe on television because of where they live. Let's see if I can pick out a few more here. Have you or your spouse gone fishing in the last 5 years? By the way, I'm going to do that on Saturday. Then they have you been to these restaurants? It's got Applebee's, Waffle House, Denny's, IHOP, Ruby Tuesday, Ponderosa Steakhouse. Again, if you grew up in uptown New York City, you don't even know what those restaurants are, perhaps. And then in high school, did you letter in anything, in terms of sports? Have you ever attended a meeting of a Kiwanis Club, a Rotary Club, a Union Local? Have you ever participated in a parade not involving global warming, a war protest, or gay rights? And on and on. So you can kind of get the idea. But these are questions which then very quickly show that, as my column points out, that the people that oftentimes in the media are determining what you see, read, and hear are not anything like you and me, most of the listeners to Point of View. And then when we look at the zip codes of, in a sense, the bedroom communities of the people that are the lawmakers and the bureaucrats, many of them don't know what you are like as well. And so there are some very significant issues involved with that. But if nothing else, I just thought that as we wind down the program today, might give you a little quick bubble quiz. And I would imagine that the way you would answer it is extremely different in many ways from some of the people in New York City, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, or a number of other places that we can pick up. And that's why I posted that particular commentary today. And if you don't receive my commentary in your inbox, let me just mention that as you click on the Viewpoints commentary, there's a little section on the left-hand side that says sign up, and you can sign up so that we will send it to you every day. My commentary comes to you Monday through Friday. Penna Dexter's commentary, which she does once a week, comes on Saturday. And as you go to the website, don't forget, we still have our election resources available to you, and I hope that you will take the time to use those, print them out, pass them on to others. I suspect most of you have already voted, so see if you can find some other people who need to get out and vote as well. And if you need to educate them, we've given you the information to do so. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for our weekend edition.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is